about personally. As part of the fellowship, we are always looking for people from within the tech and design community who are interested in using their skills for good and work in government for 10-month fellowships. But the fellowship is a short-term solution, we know that. But it's an interesting thing to think about because many of our fellows go on to stay in government, either within the department that they worked at as part of the fellowship or another part of government, which is pretty interesting. But we know that there's folks who are doing this work to recruit people full-time into the public service. So we're excited to have them here today to share a little bit more about how it is they're competing with places like Shopify and Google and workplaces that have unlimited vacation and beer and ping pong in the office, and how it is that you help them think about this. It's so, talent is so important, and it's something to think about in the way you recruit, write job descriptions, but then how you create safe spaces for folks to share ideas and be brave enough to speak out and do things differently. So we have about 15 minutes. We hear from each of them for about 10 to 15-ish minutes, and then hopefully we'll have some time for questions. But our first speaker, Andrea, is here, the head of talent at the Canadian Digital Service. She has a background in HR and recruitment and has worked at companies like OpenText, BlackBerry, and Communitech. And in her role at the CDS, she leads the team that's responsible, or has been responsible for doubling the team in the last 18 months, which is pretty impressive. And fun fact about her is that she's a chai tea addict and spends her winters at local ski hills. So I'm going to pass it on to Andrea. Just get us started. Thank you.
That's me. Okay. Perfect. Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here to talk about talent and recruitment. Shout out to Ryan. That's how I found my way to CDS, so we can talk about that later. So thanks for coming. So I'm going to be chatting about 3 things today around some of the work that CDS has been doing to hire and then keep talent. I'm going to chat about how we've changed the interviews, how we get feedback from our team, and then also about how our team progresses in their careers. So given the time, I'm not going to be able to get into the nitty-gritties of each of these programs, but I'm going to focus on the highlights. But I'm more than happy to connect with anybody afterwards or answer any questions in any of these programs. So to kind of set the stage, I started at CDS 18 months ago, and my role was to build out a talent team and really focus on people practices and build the employee experience. Creating a better experience, or a better employee experience, can lead to satisfied employees that are more productive, that are more engaged in the work that they do. They refer people, and they stay with us longer. And so the employee experience from our point of view happens right at the very beginning, your first point of contact. I would say in lots of ways it's before that, but ideally first point of contact with the candidate. So when you first reach out to get a possible candidate, right up to them being a CDS alum. And so we're looking at that whole process and how we can make that better. Something to note about our organization, we run a tour of service model. So people are coming into our organization, usually do a few years, and then will likely go to the broader public service or go back to the private sector. So it's a little unique from our talent experience, or our talent team, is that we have people coming and going. And so we've had to spend a lot of time figuring out how does that happen and how do we do the work to make that an easier transition on everyone. So first off, first off I want to talk about interviews. So we wanted to make interviews better. We've done a lot of interviewing. As was noted, we're up to just over 80 employees, and we've hired lots of people and had lots of interviews over the last little while. And we know that interviews are not really a really welcoming experience for most people. It's not something that they look forward to. We know it can be intimidating. And ultimately, it's a process that we knew that we could make a little bit better. So one of the major changes that we have done is in our panel interview, which is our stage 3 interview, so kind of our big interview where we talk about the core values as well as get more in depth in their technical skills. That's when we decided to give people a chance to see the questions. I know, it sounds pretty wild, pretty crazy. Really, you gave them the questions? And so what we do, and the way that works for us, is at the beginning of their interview, the first half an hour is by themselves, with the questions and a notepad. And they know this in advance, not like they're just like, whoa, drop. But they know that this is gonna happen, and so that they're prepared. It gives them a moment to collect their thoughts and take a pause. Then the interview starts after that. So the way we see it is that we are not really trying to assess how someone spontaneously comes up with questions and answers to the questions that we have. Sometimes that's really useful, but that's not the case for us. The second piece, it really does ease the candidate and it alleviates some stress, and we get a better performance from the interview of what we think they actually know and how they want to share with us. In making this change, we have had some bumps along the road that I thought might be useful to share, so that maybe you can avoid them if you decide to implement this practice. So first off, make sure everybody on the committee knows that they're going to have the questions in advance. We had a last-minute substitution. Whoops, candidate had the questions, obviously, but the interviewer, one of the interviewers, didn't realize that we were giving the questions in advance and spent, I'd say, a good portion of that interview going, do they have the questions? Whoops, sorry about that. And yeah, so now we think we've covered our bases, but make sure everybody knows, even last minute substitutes. Next up, we found that 30 minutes is about the right amount of time for people to collect their thoughts and take a pause, but not too much time to go research questions and fabricate answers. At this point, I'm saying, don't worry about cheating. People can always, make up answers on any questions, ask the follow-up questions, and help validate in that way. And last, our experience is that this practice has been well received by candidates. They feel that they can share their experience, and we think that we've been able to hire some really amazing candidates who might not have excelled in the interview setting previously. So ultimately, candidates have the opportunity to prepare a little, which allows them to share their skills and their experience and their knowledge more fully, and we think we get candidates that shine in the interview setting. So that is my first little case study for you. Next up, I wanted to talk about the CDS Health Check. So the CDS Health Check is an engagement survey. For those in the public service, you're probably wondering, there is a public service engagement survey already happening. You're right, there totally is. It's big, it's amazing, but it happens once a year. So similar to our digital friends and digital partners in our organization who want to get feedback more often from their users, we also felt that was a really important aspect for us as well. So we created the CDS Health Check. Similar to the big survey, employees have the chance to give anonymous feedback, but we also give them the opportunity to share their comments verbatim with the senior leaders in the org. In addition, though, it also gives us some real-time insights into our employee experience and is an opportunity for us to check if we're on the right track or course correct when we do something that maybe isn't super well received. So we run the survey, and after each survey, we summarize those numbers and share those back with the team at the next team meeting. So those happen every 2 weeks. So usually we have a really tight return on those kind of number questions. For the written feedback, that takes us a little bit longer. And so we worked with our research teams to build out a framework. And so I work with the senior managers and we categorize all of the comments and we pull out the critical and common themes and we prioritize. And we build out action plans that we share with our team, and we do that on a continuous basis through the year. One caution from our experience, and especially that first survey, even though we knew we should only focus on the top items, we wanted to do everything. Because as you know, in a people organization, you're like, oh, we could totally knock off a whole bunch of these. We overcommitted, it wasn't a great, we were just spread too thin. So word of caution, prioritize. You will want to fix everything, but just focus on the things that are the most important at that time, and know that in 3 months you're going to have that same mechanism again, and you can start to do other things on that list. I'd also encourage you to be flexible. So while our survey started off very short initially with 5 questions, over time we've added a few additional questions and I'd say a few more. But for the most part, it's still pretty slim, but it's understanding where you need a little bit more information. So for us, it was adding diversity, inclusion, and belonging questions to understand our baselines and then figure out where we could improve and make some action plans in that space. And so we needed some more specific information to dig into that. And on another note, I don't know that I've actually said it yet, but we do this, we talk about this survey being quarterly. And what I will tell you is that generally it's actually taking us 4 months. So not 3 months, 4 months. We're looking for ways to make it tighter, but it's still an ongoing process. And so just give yourself enough time to kind of work through all of those steps. To give you an idea of some of the changes we've made based on the health check, I want to go over some of the things that we've done based on that feedback. So on the smaller scale, we've opened up our management meeting minutes to everyone so they're available. And we've clarified escalation paths because we're a matrixed organization and that was actually pretty unclear. And so we were able to document that and share that with our team. Some of the bigger items that have come out of the health check are creating a code of conduct that we call the CDS employee commitment, and rolling out unconscious bias training that we have adapted from some open source material and are rolling out in the next few weeks to make sure it's CDS centric. And one of the areas that we needed to course correct on was on our career progressions, which I'm going to talk about next. Before I do, to sum up this chapter, if you will, is that employees have a chance through our CDS health check to voice what's working and what's not, and that helps us figure out where we should focus our time. I'm not changing my slides. I realize, sorry about that, folks. There's not much there. See, we collect feedback, it's anonymous, it's great. Okay. Moving on. All right, so next up, if I change my slide. Oh yeah, no, that's it, okay. We're good. We got this. Okay, last one is our CDS career progressions. So CDS has been growing fast, as I've already kind of alluded to. And as we came into year 2, we're now just going into year 3, but as we came into year 2, more and more folks were looking to understand how they could progress in the organization. We started to build out career progressions. Seems like, simple solution. We want to focus on defining the skills, the experience, the behaviors needed to move through the organization, and what was expected at each level. I've already mentioned this is where we needed to course correct, so let me talk about what we were trying to do, how we're pivoting, and what we hope to see in the coming months. I'll also let you know that this is still very much a work in progress, that we haven't delivered this finally, so sharing our early stages of learning. So first off, why we wanted to implement career progressions. Pretty simple, our team was looking for more clarity. This gave us a framework to clarify our expectations, as well as for them to understand their roles, what we expected of them, and how they can actually progress in the organization. In government, which I am fairly new to government, this is actually a fairly well-defined process for most folks. And so in particular for the people who would come from government, they're like, everybody has this pretty much figured out in government. We all know what each other is, kind of what their progression is. It's really structured. But when we start introducing digital teams, that's not something that is very clear. So thank goodness some other folks were ahead of us in this area, so I'll get to that in one second. But ultimately, progressions are the foundation for equity. So having clear definitions of how the team progresses is a way to make it more of an opportunity for everyone to progress and have the opportunity to do so. So we started looking at our peers outside of Canada because they had had digital services longer. GDS, based out of the UK, is a CDS peer, and they have really well documented progression. So we're like, perfect, let's take those over. We started adapting them to our context. We think we're in pretty good shape. Maybe a little cocky at this point, but we thought we were in really good shape. They had the product manager and the designers and the research designers. I can't talk. Research designers. And so we started to look at those. We ended up making an entirely new process though, with new terminology and new definitions and new criteria, because we took too much of their work and put it into our context. Now, for context for those maybe not in the government already, in the federal government, is that we already had a performance development process that's very well defined with competencies in those. We have an OKR process, which is objective and key results, that we had implemented into CDS. And now this was ultimately adding a third, completely separate, not a lot of overlap, item into the team. So while we had the best of intentions, we really did create a make-work project for ourselves, and it didn't necessarily resonate with the team. So as we go into version 2, we are aligning our progressions, the behavioral competencies, with our performance management process. Pretty simple to do. So working through that process right now. On the technical competencies, there will be some influence from the GDS team, but more accustomed to or brought into our context and working with the team. The other piece of it is that in our divide and conquer mode, we started working in really small groups. And while we thought we had gotten enough feedback, what we realized is that we didn't open it up enough to the rest of the team. On something so important to the team, this became a real big miss, quite frankly. And so we realized that we needed to go back and have those conversations. So now as we go into version 2, we are having team sessions as in the teams, in the community teams, as well as across the organization and cross-functionally, so that we can have, make sure that the behaviors are across the organization. So we're working on these. We're trying to finalize them by the end of April, so wish us luck. I think we're on a much better track to having a successful progressions framework for ourselves. So ultimately, employees have the opportunity to own their career paths with the support of their managers, and it provides transparency for promotions and movement with the organization, which we know fosters equality. So that sums up the 3 programs I wanted to chat about. I also did a slide, which I won't be able to go into too much further, of a whole bunch of other things that we're doing in the talent and employee experience space. Happy to answer questions about these later on, or chat with me after. This is totally a steal from a slide you're going to see in a few minutes, but it's just so important, I think, and it's been our mantra since the beginning. So some things will work, many things won't, but we have to keep trying, and that's really been the focus of, I think, design and delivery teams, but also should be for the talent and HR functions that we have. And last but not least is we have gotten on the GitHub bandwagon as our friends on the delivery side. And my team and I have built out this talent handbook. And we are trying to work in the open and share what we're working on. There's lots of stuff that I talked about today already available on the talent handbook, and we will continue to add things as we work and get those finished. So please feel free to check it out and let us know what you think. Thank you. That's it. The questions will be after in a second.
Thanks, Andrea. That was great. I have a bunch of follow-up questions, but I'll wait. Our next speaker is here from the Ontario Digital Service. Please join me in welcoming Samir Vasta. Samir is a founding member of the ODS and currently works there as the lead of employee experience. I got that right?
Got it.
He also teaches digital government as part of the University of Waterloo's Masters of Public Service program. And for fun, he reads a lot of library books and writes letters to pen pals. Please join me in welcoming Samir.
Thanks, everyone. I'm assuming everyone can hear me. If you can't, just wave. I'm really excited to actually come after Andrea, because so much of what we do in the Ontario Digital Service, we've been learning from the Canadian Digital Service and from amazing thought leaders like Andrea and their whole team, who've been really charting a path for how we can do these kinds of things across the country. And that's why I'm excited also to be sharing some of these things here at the Code for Canada Summit, because it doesn't make sense for us to be doing what we're doing simply here in Ontario or just for our teams. What makes sense is that if we're trying to make digital government, we need to start thinking about how this can be applied across the country and at various places in the public service, not just in these small digital teams. There's an inherent amount of privilege in that, and I need to acknowledge that right at the start. I've been lucky to be part of the ODS from when it was a group of 7 people who were like, what should we do? To now 170 people who are like, we don't have enough people to do what we are doing. And to be part of that process has also let me realize that I have been given an opportunity and a place to experiment that not everyone does. And we always say, and that's the mantra I always use is, it won't, some things will work, many things won't, but we have to keep trying. But who actually has a privilege to keep trying? Something I've been thinking about, experimentation is not something that is afforded to everyone. Many of us in this room are lucky that we're going to be able to experiment through our careers, but a lot of the people we work with will never get that chance. What is our role? What is our commitment to the people who can't, to make sure that that experimentation can still happen and we can support them through that? I don't have answers, I'm just throwing that out there. This is something I want us to hold, especially when we're dealing with talent. And one of the things I'm not going to worry about slides. I'm going to move this just so you don't have to look at my face the whole time. But one of the things I'm also kind of grappling with, and it's essentially the first slide after this, is that we need to rethink the word talent. I always put talent in brackets, right, in parentheses, because talent doesn't actually make sense to me in the way we're working. People that work on digital products, that people that work on our digital teams aren't just talent. They're not just there because they're good at what they do, and they're not just there for a group of skills and competencies they have. They're whole humans. They come with their challenges, their barriers, their experiences, their perspectives. And if we want to nurture talent, if we want to, first of all, attract it, and then retain it, and let it go, I think we need to also talk about it's good to let talent go. If we're going to be doing this, then we need to stop thinking about it as just talent. We need to start thinking about the whole comprehensive people that are coming with an immense amount of baggage, but also an immense amount of opportunity. So how do we leverage that opportunity and how we build on that? Again, I don't have answers. That's why I'm going to wrap up very soon, and you're going to tell me everything like that. I did want to give an example of 3 things that we have tried. Because in the culture of experimentation that we have been afforded, we've been able to try a whole bunch of things. And we've tried 3 things that we've seen really good success with, and then I'll finish with a few things that perhaps we haven't seen some success with. But 3 things that really resonated with us. The first thing I wanted to share about was allowing people to write manager job descriptions. So when we started the Ontario Digital Service, we didn't have managers. We had a whole bunch of staff. We had developers, we had designers, we had people doing the work, but we didn't actually have a management cadre to support that work to happen. In the public service, we know we need to have management because there's no such thing as a flat organization in public service. We have accountabilities. We're accountable to the public. We must draw a line of accountability. So management is really, really important for that accountability and for that idea of supporting the people that do the work. But instead of going out and finding a management spec and saying, this is what managers do, we said, let's go to the teams that are doing the work. So we sat down with our user researchers. We sat down with our product managers. We sat down with our developers, and we said, if you were to hire your perfect manager, what would that manager look like? We took all of that, we rationalized it with our collective bargaining, because obviously we couldn't go just take exactly what they gave us. And then we created job descriptions, and when we posted these job postings, they were reflective of what the teams wanted and needed from their management. Now, obviously, you can't do that all the time. We had a clean slate to work from, so we were lucky to be able to do that. But what did that mean? That meant, first of all, that the people we were going to hire were going to be reflecting the needs of the team. But it also meant that we gave voice and power to the people on the team to say what they needed. And that's something we don't always do in public service. So thinking about kind of how does letting people decide who's going to be their leader, decide who's going to support them, decide who's going to be their anchor. If we let them do that, how are we actually supporting their whole selves? And one of the great things we found when they were writing their job descriptions was that it wasn't just we need someone who has these skills, like an excellent product manager or has this much experience in product. A lot of times we need someone who's going to be willing to let me take time off if I need to take it with for my kids. Or we need someone who's going to understand that I need to work in a dark office sometimes because that's just how my brain works. Right? So we were able to take the whole self, not just the talent piece of our talent, but the whole self, and say, how do we reflect that in the people that are going to support and manage these people? It's been a success in the sense that we're still using many of these job descriptions, and we revise them with the teams as regularly as we can. Sometimes, obviously, you don't get the right person, sometimes you do, but the entire process of revising these and having people define who their management, who their leaders will be, has been really, really fruitful for us. Related to that, one of the things that we tried at that time, and we've been continuing to try to do, is cohort-based hiring. Why hire in a cohort? So usually you have a gap, you need to fill it, you hire someone to fill that gap. What we've been trying to do is, as much as possible, find when there are 4 or 5 gaps, and then hire together. In the management cadre, it was really easy for us to do that because we had no managers. So we're like, we need to hire 5 managers. Right now, we're going to hire all 5 of them together. It worked. It worked for us because of 2 big things. First, it allows us to understand the makeup of the people that are coming in the cohort. And we're able to think about ideas of diversity. We're able to think about representation. If we are going to be building services for Ontarians, how do we actually represent Ontario? And how do we make sure that the people we're bringing in are representative of the people that we're serving? That is a lot easier to do when you're hiring 5 people at a time than it is 1 at a time. Because 1 at a time, it's a lot easier to say, this person fits my need, this person fits my need, and not look at the package, right? How does a complement of people fit needs? How does a complement of people represent the people that we need to have in this organization? The other great thing about cohort-based hiring, and this really ties into retention, is that when you come in as a cohort, you have inherent support. from people who came at the same time. You've created a peer group right there. We brought in the cohorts together after their initial interviews. We brought them in together as part of group work. We brought them in, did all of their onboarding together, and we still do that. We do that with any incoming group of people that come to the organization where we're not hiring ad hoc. And by doing that, we're telling people that if you need to reach out, you have people who are in the same position as you have people who are going through the same challenges as you, and you can work together. And they create Slack channels just for them, for those cohorts. And they create, I don't know if Skydra is like part of some of these, but like, they go for lunch together. They've created a peer network that is not just affinity-based, that is not just work-based, but it's really about this kind of, we have a shared experience. So cohort-based hiring has been really great for us. Obviously, we can't do that right now because we're not hiring. But it's definitely something that we're looking to do. The last thing I want to talk about is really about this employee experience. And it's, I was just talking to Hannah, where'd she go? She's here, oh, right there, about this before we started. And it's the idea of kind of, the public service is great at kind of creating employee engagement committees and employee engagement teams, or having employee experience surveys, or really kind of dictating, we know what the employee experience should be, so we're going to start creating things. And there's a lot of, we're going to have 4 cultural days, and we're going to have a Christmas party, and 3 lunch and learns on things that you didn't know before. And that's it, that's going to be our employee experience. One of the things we don't always ask is, what do people actually want and need? And so how do you build a structure where it is not up to the person in charge of employee experience to say, I'm going to create these things, but to anybody in the organization to say, you are in charge of your employee experience, and we are going to give you the power, and in some cases the money, to be able to build whatever you want out of your experience. The way we've done that is with the institution of a people board. The people board is an elected body. The elections happen every 6 months. They rotate, they have a chair. And the people board is not like an employee engagement committee, because it is not something you do off the side of your desk. You are given 20% of your time, if you're elected to the people board, 20% of your time can be spent on people board activities. So if your manager says, can you do this? You can say, no, I'm people board all day today. And that's just the way it is. The other great thing about the people board is that they actually have a voice at the senior management table. They vote in senior management votes. They have a voice there. They're represented all the time. So when things come up that the people board wants to do, it is not pleading to senior management to do it. They are a voice at senior management itself. They have a budget to work from. The people board is given money, saying if someone comes to you saying, I need this for the organization, this is what I want to do, well, you have a pool of money to work from. They're given a budget line just like the rest of the organization, like any branch or division would be. Of course, in a fiscally constrained environment, that makes it a little tricky, but we're working through that. But that's kind of the idea, is what the people board is a place where you don't have to come to me as an employee experience lead saying, I think we need these kinds of things. The people board is a place where you work with your elected officials and you say, I need this to work for me. I have an idea of how to institute it, and they say, yeah, let's do it. They don't have to ask for permission. They do it because that's what's right for the employee. And that's one model. There are so many other models of doing that, but that's one model that we've tried. There are a whole bunch of other things that we've tried that I love, like adding peer reviews to our performance process. You know, things that, obviously going distributed first as a workplace. And a lot of these haven't worked either. Kind of like the peer reviews and the performance plans we don't do anymore because they were just something, it seemed to be make work. We thought it would be great, but it's not. People thought it was too much work. Things like eliminating homework in the hiring process, like no one's given assignments to come in with their interview anymore. Some people actually said, no, we want assignments. It's easier for us to prepare in advance than it is for us to go. So kind of creating an interview process that's more adaptive and flexible to people. There's a lot of things we've tried. It's, again, the mantra that some things will work, many things won't, and the importance of the many things won't, but we have to keep trying. But also, as we keep trying, we have to also very poignantly remember that we are in a place where we can try. Not everyone can. So what is our responsibility to those that can't, to make sure that we are trying in the best possible way for them? And that's it for now. Happy to chat more. I wanted to keep it short so we can have Q&A. And I think, Neha, you're up after this.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Sabrina and Andrea, if you want to pull up some chairs, I think that might be easier. I'll do the same thing. I'll be good. So I'll stand. Yeah.
my water here and then left it.
So,
Yeah, don't do that. It won't be attractive. Okay, well, thank you for that. That was super helpful, and I took a bunch of notes. But I'm going to kick us off with the first question, but hopefully we'll have enough time for anyone who wants to jump in. So, Andrea, you spoke a lot about the interview process, and Samir, you spoke a little bit about some of the things that you've done, eliminating take-home stuff. But can you speak a little bit about the step before that? How do you get people through the door? How do you get people excited? How do you recruit people so that they're willing to interview with you, and making sure you're getting the right people through the door?
you go ahead.
All right. So for us, the easiest, and I'm thinking it might be similar across the board, but correct me, is mission-driven work. And so fundamentally, like if we can talk to someone, we have a very high chance of flipping them to be a candidate and considering that. But we have invested very heavily in recruitment at CDS, and we have a dedicated, between Brock, who is our dedicated talent partner, and myself, we do a lot of direct outreach, in addition to posting and chats. I'd say the other thing that's been super effective for us is speaking engagements. So being at places like Code for Canada or being at tech conferences, being able to talk about the impact of the work has brought the amount of people that have come through that channel or like came back to us, when it was the right time for them, has been a big piece of our uptake.
Yeah, I think similarly for us, the idea that the work speaks for itself has been our best recruiting tool. Right? If someone can say, hey, government's working better for me, who's doing that work, that's been our best recruiting tool. We haven't done any active recruiting. When we have a posting, we get too many applications right now, so and we don't have postings right now, so it's been a lot easier that way. But the reality is, if you do good work and you have a workplace that allows a whole self to come, and you make that clear in the work that Skydra's doing in our blog, we make it very clear that this is the kind of workplace we're creating. One of the things we like to say in our talent team is that our job is to be the brand ambassadors for the people in the organization and how the people work, right? So it is very similar to a comms role, but if we can say this is what it's like to work here and this is the kind of work that we do, then we don't need to do any active recruiting. That might change in the future, but right now that's been our best bet. So.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from the group? Yeah, Ryan.
One of the things I'm wondering kind of how you're addressing, I know it's certainly the case in CD for CDS, but I think with a lot of digital teams, you get this mix of public servants who've kind of had a career on the government side of the fence and folks are bringing from the private sector. And I mean, Andrea, you got into it a little bit on kind of that notion around career progression, which is one part of it. But I'm just wondering if you can kind of speak to how you've been managing that, because I think that's, that mix of different worldviews is part of the magic. But there's also a real tension there as well, right, and very different expectations. So I'm just curious about if you can kind of speak to how you manage those two different worlds that are coexisting in your teams.
So I don't say that we've figured it out. There's no silver bullet. That being said, there is what we find is actually spending time talking about those pieces. Our team is about 80% private coming into government, or at least new to Canadian government, so there's some nuances there, but so our biggest gap actually is the government side as a digital service. So we don't have enough people that understand the machinery of government and why we do certain things. So some of the things that we've struggled around are things like how do we let everyone know what are some of the rules in the government? Like there's things that are great, and there's things that are not so great. And so understanding what those are and doing a fair bit of education in lots of different forms. So whether that's active or manager-based or kind of whatever. That's probably been, for us, the biggest piece.
Yeah, no, it's a good question because to be honest, though, we don't address it. And that's a failing of ours. So thank you for calling that out. And I'm going to take that back with me. I think one of the distinctions that we see, less private and public sector backgrounds, is public sector backgrounds that have always been in central decision-making agencies, and public sector backgrounds from the line ministries. And I don't think we have enough of the latter. We have a lot of the former. So we have a lot of people who come in to the Ontario Digital Service who have been in places where they can do things that other parts of government can't, or feel like they can work in ways that other parts of government can't, and just assume that everyone else can. And that assumption is very, very hard when you have a mandate to work with people across government to help them understand how they can work. And it frustrates a lot of people as saying, listen, I've been in government for 10 years and I've never had to ask for approval for this, right? But you've never been in a line ministry. And that's one of the things that we struggle with. If you have ideas, please tell us.
To add on that,
Yeah.
I think that's probably the other place for us is building empathy with our partners. And so we've spent a lot of time over the last little while talking about that. We do a 2-day offsite it got canceled. Okay, I was on the panel on the management meeting deciding that it's going to be canceled. That being said, we do a session on bringing our partners in to talk to us and give us essentially real talk back to our teams. And that's been really effective, and we're trying to look at how do we bring more of that in? Because we're at the center, and so we have different, they're like, oh, it's because you're in, they're the people that make the rules and you're breaking the rules, or you're doing we get some of those perceptions, so trying to figure out and ultimately build empathy with our team.
Thank you for asking that.
Honey, let me go to you. Yeah.
Okay, so there's an inherent contradiction between the message of a mission-driven organization and I guess the other part is having a career progression, and then finally the notion of just doing a tour of duty. How do you reconcile that so that there's actually a way to offboard, and so that it doesn't become the last place in government that somebody participates, especially if they've never worked there before?
Yeah, no, I'm trying to figure out if I should wear my ODS hat or my Samira's ranting hat on this one.
Please do both.
So the Samira's ranting hat is that we do, not just us in the Ontario Digital Service, but inherently in public service, a great disservice to our employees because we never prepare them for what's next. And we focus so much on retention that we forget that actually it's good for people to grow. And if we are accepting people to be whole people at work and not just their bucket of talent that they are, we not only have to expect them to leave, but we have a duty to prepare them for what's next. So that contradiction, actually, if we do a good job, shouldn't exist. Because yes, you're coming because we're a mission-driven organization, but your mission is bigger than the organization. Right? We just relate. Like everyone has meaning in their life, like Moana, her meaning was ocean, right? Her name means ocean, right? And so yes, it might mean I want to be a seafarer for a little time, but it also means I might want to be an oceanographer as well, right? So how do you find that meaning inherent to everyone, and then how do we fit a small piece of that meaning? Now that's me wearing my eventually I want to get there hat. My official hat is slightly different in the sense that I think there is that contradiction does exist, but I think we can rationalize that contradiction by understanding that even though we say we're mission driven, we are still part of a broad public service, and the broad public service has its mission to serve the public, right? And so it doesn't matter how you do that. Inherently, everyone's coming to serve the public, so it's okay even if our mission is kind of tightly defined, that it feels at odds, because at the core, everyone has the same mission. So it's a small nuance, but.
Yeah. So for us, I think the mission-driven organization is what gets us people. It gets them to talk to us, and it ultimately gets them to join. But I think we were pretty naive to think that would keep them there. Through all the frustrations and all of the other things that happen. And so ultimately, yes, you're pushing the mission forward, and yes, you're working on things that are really meaningful to people in this country. But that doesn't actually day in, day out keep you there. And I think that's ultimately where those progressions actually came from, is that you still have to be moving along, right? Whether you're coming for a time or coming for a longer stint, that is definitely a piece of the puzzle. We had funding originally at CDS till the end of this March. And so we're having our first big transition that's happening in, I'd say, a much more condensed way than it has happened thus far. It was a bit more nuanced, or like it wasn't at the same time. And so that's been challenging for our org, and trying to work through what does that actually look like. And I think that's something that we've spent a lot of time talking about, but trying to figure out, like, how do we actually work through that process? We have our first person, which my team doesn't know this yet, surprise. We have our first person that's going to be going to another department, and so that is like a super good news story for us. And there'll be more to come on that, but it's super exciting. And like, that's ultimately the goal, is that people love it, and like, whether they want to live in the CDS pace of the world, which is a bit unique, or go focus on something else, and giving them that opportunity to go and have a permanent job, which is a piece of the puzzle that we haven't been able to provide for most folks, is that ours, we're set up on term employment, so that they're coming for a tour. And then we have other people who are like, okay, yeah, I did my 2 years and I'm gonna stay for another 2 years. And that's also exciting. But it's challenging, and I think that there's an emotional toll on the organization to work through that process. And I would say we're at the early stages of that process.
It just heartens me to say that it's exciting when you said it was exciting that someone's leaving, because too often I work with people in HR who, like, as soon as someone's leaving, they see it as like a black mark on you. They're very much like, oh no, your numbers, your people are leaving and not coming in, and this is horrible, and you're doing a bad job. So thank you for not looking at it that way.
But it's a process, and like, there's a lot of feelings, right, around things like that, and like. And it's an interesting piece, because I've been in some other working groups on like the changing work and like the future of work, and I don't think we've done enough to equip people about like, what does that actually look like when your contract ends or contract's not renewed? Like, what does that actually mean? Because it's shitty, right? And so how do we make that work?
Yeah, so I guess my question is perhaps more applicable to like the federal public service side, though equally it may apply to the provincial side. So my question is more around like the actual like mechanism of hiring. That can be a bit of a nebulous thing for people outside the government. So like, I have a lot of friends who are interested in a career in public service, but they didn't have the opportunity to like get in when they were a student. And so now they're kind of on the other side, where they have all of this technical jargon around like pools and competitions, and you know, they apply for something and they don't hear back for 2 years, and by that point they've already found a job elsewhere. And so, I mean, I don't know if this is something you have any like expertise in, but I'm just curious to know like, what kinds of things are the public service doing to kind of accelerate that hiring process and make it less cumbersome for people who otherwise are very talented and do have a genuine interest in the public service, but find it very like discouraging to get their
Yes, they need an insider track to understand how to navigate.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, interesting question. So, CDS doesn't do it that way, right. Which has pluses and lots of negatives, because the other teams haven't been able to replicate that. So for us, we run it, I'd say, more similar to a private sector process. So we post on those channels and do those pieces, but we bring you through a recruitment process that has 4 steps, it's outlined pretty clearly, and has all the pieces. We are now at the stage where kind of some of the speakers that I've talked about, in particular, I think it was Rowan this morning, that talked about like that next hurdle, and like, we've been hackers, and in particular on my team, hacking. Like, find a mechanism, it might work today, it might not work tomorrow, we'll figure out tomorrow later, and like, we'll have that. It's like, well, that worked this time, but now that's not a thing. But what my team's been focused on over the last few months is how do we transition some of those pieces, and how do we get some of those bigger changes. So I'd say it's very early days, and it is super frustrating, and I don't have any good answers of like, these cool, like those are not fabrications of the story. Like, it really does take a year or 2 to get through a process, which is mind-boggling to me. But I also didn't come from this world, and I think that's part of what happens, is that people like, it's just what it is. And I think you talked to it yesterday about like, you're just like, it's just what it is. Like, we just learn to deal with it. And there is moments like that I'm like, oh, they're wearing me down. I just said this. That's just the system. And so you gotta, so we're just at that stage to try and change some of those pieces, but It's the other things, right? It's the processes that have been set up, the unions that are in place to protect some of these pieces. Like, these are not easy fixes, and we got a lot of stuff to navigate.
I can add something.
Please.
Yeah.
Please.
I know that there's a new public service sort of, I don't want to call it charter or whatever it is, but there's new ways that managers can go about hiring now that are slowly, I do mean slowly, starting to make their way and be utilized by those managers. It's just that it's not widely known yet, and it does kind of prevent that 2-year span, and especially in this age and with digital services where it's hard to attract and it's hard to grasp the right people at the right time. And so those opportunities are there, so don't give up, keep trying. Network.
Yeah, and I'd say that, like, so in our mechanism, it's using appointments, and those are open up now. Like, you can use those, but they're kind of frowned upon. So it's trying to figure out, like, it's absolutely allowed, but it's not common practice yet. And so, like, some of those things is figuring out, like, how do we help people get to those pieces? And for our teams, that for people who might be transitioning to other departments, we're looking at mechanisms to help them transition so that it's easier for them to then, get those ins. Obviously, they've worked with us already, but it's just trying to make it seamless, right? And trying to find ways to keep hacking. But you're right, it's a big process.
I'm going to put my ethics and justice professor hat on now. And I'm going to say something that's going to get me in a lot of trouble, but I have a tendency to do that. The public service is inherently, and at its core, the way it's designed, systemically inequitable and colonial. I'm not going to talk about the colonization thing because we're all going to go and listen to the Decolonizing Digital very soon. But we need to understand that the idea of public service at its core was designed to keep people out. Okay? And part of the way we keep people out is creating systems that are opaque. And I mean, I grew up, like, I'll be honest, I grew up being like, I would never work in public service because I grew up as a F the police kind of person, right? Like, I got arrested a couple of times. It happens, right? You know what I mean? Like, it's one of those things where, like, it's not I never saw myself in public service, and I was lucky that I had mentors. But that's, again, a huge area of privilege that I had, that mentors that showed me a path that I could forge. But we have a system that is inherently inequitable. And in order to fix that, processes are great, but we kind of need revolution, right? And we need people on the inside, and I'm at fault for it because I don't do it often enough. I try, but I don't do it often enough, to say, no, F that. Right? Like, this is wrong. This is systemically wrong. And if we keep doing it, or if we endorse it and we just let it go by, it's not going to change. All that to say is, like, I'm not fixing the problem for your friend, right? But this is a conversation we need to be having larger than Code for Canada. This is a conversation that we need to be having about the nature of public service, the nature of government, and the idea that we have built a systemically unequal process for people to actually serve the public.
And maybe just to add on that just a little bit, is that piece that, like, I'd say that we would think that, but everything that is written about it is saying that it's done that way to be fair. To be fair, yes. Like, to be super clear, like, that's what we're saying. We were prepping for another talk for later in the week in the US with some of our US counterparts that worked at USDS, and we had a whole section about that part in particular around this whole system that was set up to be fair is actually what's causing some of our issues now. And it's not, like, unless you are an insider and know how pools work and, like, pretty much have a dissertation on how to get hired into the public service, or have someone who can give you the privilege to navigate how that actually works and how you get from a contract and, like, all of those things, it's hard to do. And I think that's where some other groups are trying to actually figure out, how do we make that more commonplace.
This is my call to Gabe and Code for Canada, really, is that I think from the outside they have a voice to say that, we need to dismantle the systemic inequality that we have, because sometimes we can't always do that from the inside, so we need people from the outside to say it.
Just curious to hear from you, how do you think workplace can compete with the private sector? I'm in OPS, we pay for water, we pay for our microwave, we pay for our fridge. Decisions take forever to make, and we have these students that said, oh, can we just implement something? Like, no, we're waiting for the decision, it takes 1 month, another few months, and they're gone. So if we get this talent, so how do we retain them? Do you have any ideas, anything to share? Just make it cool and sexy to work in government, because you can deliver innovation, you're delivering great service for the public, but it's only one thing. It's harder to compete with other perks that private sector has.
I think that idea of cool and sexy is perhaps what's tripping us up, and I think our problem is that we're trying to make government cool and sexy to work for. And a person I love working with and who's in this room says that bureaucracy is a feature, not a bug. And to be honest, we need to embrace that that's what we are, and we are bureaucratic for a reason, right? We are bureaucratic because it helps us be accountable to the right people. So how do we help find people who will embrace that? So instead of trying to be cool and sexy, I would say how do you give people meaningful work? So that even if it's not the coolest or the sexiest, they go home every day and say, God damn it, I did something good today, right? It was the most mind-numbing thing in the world, but God damn it, someone's life is better because of me. And that's how you keep people. And we're gonna lose a lot of people because not everyone wants that, right? Some people want a ping pong table, right? And you know what? We can't give it to them, but that's okay. I know, that's my thought.
Yeah, so I was gonna say a similar thing, but like we don't, and know who we are, right? So it's understanding and embracing what those features are of the process and finding your people. One hack that we have had in CDS, and this has happened a little bit, is that we are distributed across Canada. And I happen to have the very, very wonderful privilege of working at the Canada Tech building. So I have the ping pong table, and I have and so I'm just telling if we could just go mingle a little bit further with our private sector people that have those perks. I'm just saying it makes it not so bad. But we had folks from like different places. And they're like, I thought I was cool with giving up all my perks, but like I went for my Coke at 3 o'clock and I couldn't eat, like there's not even a vending machine. I'm like, I know, it's tough, but you got this. But they came, right? And they want to come back, and it is what it is.
And the other thing you can also do is just trust people to find a way that works best for them. And that's hard to do in public service because we're told people need to be at their desks and we need to monitor what they're doing and all of that. But if you were to go and tell a young professional who has just come into the public service saying, listen, this is what you need to work on. I'm going to trust you as your manager to do it however you need to do it, wherever you need to do it, whenever you need to do it, depending on our, of course, structure and timelines. That allows them to go and sit in a coffee shop and do it, or play ping pong and do it, and whatever it means, because you're not watching over where they are or what they're doing. And it's hard because we have to hire for trust, but if we're able to hire for trust and then give that trust to people, all of a sudden those perks are things we don't need to provide because they provide for themselves and they know what they want better than we do.
So a bit of a comment on what you said is there's a lot of narratives, especially like in technology, around private companies are also like adopting the narrative of like we're doing good to help the world, etc. So it's like it's like one of these things where the government says, well, you come in and affect a lot of people. Facebook says, well, you come in and you affect a lot of people. Everybody's like everybody's like saying telling you some version of the same story. My question is around like motivation. What have you found to be the motivation of people who come and stay within the government? Like, what are like the key pieces for them in common? And I guess either or both of you can answer that, because I don't think it's perks. So
it's definitely not perks.
The thing that comes to mind for me immediately is resilience. Of people who come and want to do that. We have just implemented values that talk about resilience not being an individual trait, but a team trait. Because even folks who have, I would say, generally some pretty high resilience, like the work is hard. but it's figuring out, like, can they get in and can they use their skills in something that they find is meaningful, and do they see traction? And for us, right now, I'd say what we're trying to figure out is what is the meaning of success on a project? And historically, and especially in private sector, when you ship is success. And that is probably not what's gonna happen here. And so for us, it's figuring out, like, we're at a really interesting point where we're trying to figure out what does success mean, and how do we build that into everything that we do so that people can come along for that ride and feel accomplished. Because I think a lot of people still need that, like, they need something, right, to feel like this work matters and that they have moved it. If they're, like, back to that graphic of, like, pushing the boulder uphill, like, I did that work, and it's going to be better. This next thing is going to be better because I did this thing. And so, from an org perspective, we have some work to do in that area.
Yeah, no, it's hard because so many companies do good work for others, right? Like, I mean, that's inherently what we're going to hear about in the next few sessions, is how the private sector can support civic tech and things like that, right? So and as someone who's gone in and out of government his whole career, like, I'm probably the wrong person to be answering this because I'm probably going to leave any sometime soon. Here's the thing. If I go to Facebook and Facebook's a bad example.
Yeah.
If I go to Shopify and Shopify, Satish comes to me and he says, "Listen, we're doing really great work, and this is a good place to do this work." I will say yes. But what my boss can tell me is, we're doing really great work, and that's never going to change because our mandate is to always serve the public, not to make money. Our mandate is not to serve our shareholders. Our mandate is not to maximize profit. And this is something that the private sector could never say, because the only shareholders we have are the people who are paying the taxes to do our work. And the only profits we can make are social gains. Right? And so I wish I was in that room over there right now, because that's what they're talking about. I was building that social safety net through good service design. That's not a conversation that can happen at the private sector level, no matter how hard they try, because they are dependent on the social safety net, whereas we are building it.
Okay, on that, unfortunately we're out of time, but you can catch up with them. Thank you so much. That was a really inspiring note to end on.